Welcome back to Breaking Down the 2D Platformer. In the last section, we tackled a classic like Pong. In this section, we'll take a look at the simple mechanics of a game like Donkey Kong. In this section, we'll take a look at the initial design analysis and graybox our environment. We'll also modify our basic movement of our characters. We'll create an obstacle to jump over and one that can damage us. Lastly, we'll implement an elevator system with a power-up and create our end goals. This is video 4.1, Design Analysis and Graybox. In this video, we'll just level up the initial layout, and we'll also block out our necessities for our environment. Creating the game mode will come last, and we can set up our editor project settings accordingly. Let's get started. Alright, let's take a look at what we need to implement in order to create our first level of our Donkey Kong-esque 2D side-scrolling platformer. First off, we will most definitely need platforms in which to jump on and climb on and run on and make our way from the bottom to the top to this final platform, which will be our end of the level or end of the game. In the original Donkey Kong, there were ladders that we could use to climb, but we're going to take a different spin so we can all learn how to move geometry by implementing elevators or platforms that we can use to raise and lower via button presses, event overlaps, or other means, while ignoring our obstacle geometry that will be chasing us or rolling down these platforms. So, knowing this, let's head on over to UE4 and get started. Go ahead and launch 4.12.5. Head on over to New Project and select Side Scroller. You can see we have a 3D person with some platforms, and it looks like we can animate that character and have it jump on all these platforms, which is exactly what we want for our game. Let's output to Desktop Console, maximum quality with starter content, and let's name our project UE4 Kong and create project. Alright, our template is loaded, and look at this, we have some platforms, we have a character, and we also have a camera in here, and it looks like the camera is attached to our character, which is fantastic. So let's go ahead and hit play and see what we've been given. So we have an animating character. If you stand still, you can see he's idling with a breathing cycle. We have a run cycle, we have a jump cycle. I'm running with A and D, and then jump is just spacebar. And you can see we are landing on these platforms, we are not falling through, and that means our collision is fantastic for these, and it's exactly what we want to have start. We have slanted geometry that the character can run on, and everything looks fantastic. So let's exit out of this, and let's hop into content in our content browser. Let's set up our project management by going to New Folder, and titling this UE Kong. And let's go into UE Kong and create our subfolders of mesh. Create another one, call it materials. Let's go ahead and right click again for BP for blueprints. One more for extras, which will hold our game mode and game instance and that kind of thing. And textures. We'll also be using particles later on, so let's go ahead and click New Folder and call this particle. There we go. Okay, great. Let's head into materials and create a very simple material to separate our platforms from the rest of this environment. Let's call this M_red beam. And open this up. Create a vector 3 by holding 3 and left clicking and dragging this into our base color. Let's double click and create something pretty red. Let's use our sRGB preview so we have an accurate value of what's going on. And now it's time to create a metallic property and a roughness property. So hold 1 and left click to create a scalar value and drag it into metallic, and let's designate this at 0.65. Pretty high metallic property. Let's go ahead and select that property and Control W to duplicate it and slide this into roughness. And let's use 0.3 for roughness. And okay, we're done here, so let's go ahead and apply our changes. You can see we have a nice little preview going. And I'll hit save. And X out. Okay, great. Now, before we start applying all that, let's get rid of what we don't need. So you can see we have some duplicate geometry here. Let's delete the unnecessary parts. So the main part that I'm going to keep is this set right here, the left and right walls, and then I'm going to keep this area as kind of like a starting area. to begin our game. And before I do anything else, let's create a reference piece of geometry to know where to separate our ramps or our levels. So let's go ahead and drag this in. I roughly have an idea of how high I want our character to jump, and we're going to get into that in the next video. But for now, let's just create this piece of geometry here. I'm going to make this 300 on the Y and 100 on the X. The width doesn't really matter, but it just helps me line things up. So I'm going to put this right here, and you'll notice that the left pillar or left wall is at 1209 on the Y, so we need to make sure that that is the same amount on the right wall. Excuse me, negative 1209. There we go. And you can see that our reference geometry is pretty close here. I've got it lined up right now, so we can delete the extra piece here. We can move our reference geometry and delete the unnecessary piece that was hiding it. Let's move our reference geometry right back to where it was, and let's start focusing on building our ramps here. I'm only going to be messing with this piece right here for the time being. Main reason is that's the main portion of the ramp, so we can slide this piece to the left wall and use it as a guide for our scale of the slanted ramp. So let's go ahead and line this up perfectly, shove it up into space for a bit, and let's take a look at the rotation of this guy and rotate it to negative 20 on the X. That's a pretty decent angle. We don't want to have our obstacles running away and barreling at such a high speed that we can't actually play the game. So let's scale this up. And you'll notice that when scale is turned on, the transformation gizmo is in local space. If yours is in world space like this, you can change that by pressing just this button and it will transform from world space to local space. So let's hop back into scale and increase our scale until it just about touches both areas. There we go. Looks like we've met our quota down here. Yeah, that'll do. And yes, our bottom corner is just at the beginning there. Okay, so now we need to line up our flat portion of our platform, or the end of this section, and we need to scale out just enough so that it overlaps the top corner. Now, I'm going to have it sit right above the platform. I'm going to turn off grid snaps, and I'm going to lower it just enough. I want this to sit above because if we, say, have a rolling barrel that lands from the previous platform and starts rolling to the right, we don't want it to get caught on the lip of this geometry. We want it to roll over smoothly, so that's why I'm leaving this in a not exact line up with the corresponding geometry. So this is our platform, so now we need to duplicate and figure out where we want to put this. So let's switch to world space and Alt drag and rotate 180 degrees. Okay, great. Let's move our reference geometry into place. And this is our separator box. We need to make sure that this is correct in order to not have our character or our obstacles get caught up. Okay, looks good. Let's move this up into space and at the appropriate height. Looks like we need to do a little more. Yeah, right about there. There we go. Okay, great. So this settles a bigger Lego portion. And actually, before we go further, let's select our ledges and deselect that volume. Let's get a little closer here. There we go. And make sure your MRed beam is selected, and under details, under materials, just click the use selected asset from content browser, and now we have our red beams for our platforms. So now when we copy, these will also be red. So let's move our reference geometry. Right about there seems fine. You'll notice I'm not being exact, and ideally you want to be, but for the sake of time and just speed to get this out of the way, essentially the gray box process, I'm just going to speed this up, and with some previously known values, I have an idea of where things should go. So there's our 4 platforms. We need to create one more as our final platform and then the end of the level platform. So let's take this guy and reset its transform on the X and Y to 0. And let's scale this out a bit on the Y-axis. And we need to now scale up our walls, our left and right boundary walls to match the height. So we have a guideline of where we want this to end. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and slide this guy over to the left and make sure that it is high enough from the previous platform. Okay, looks good, looks good. Let's lower this. Make sure it's in line here. You see it got dragged way off in the space, so let's bring that back to 0. And that would be 0 on the... Yes, we're going to leave it at 0 later on, but for now we're just going to use this value here. So let's raise this up into space and shrink. I want it to be just enough so that when it collides with the wall, it is roughly the distance that we need it to be. So that looks good. There's no space, great. Looks good. Okay, so I'm going to take our reference geometry and I'm going to put it right in the middle here. Make sure it's aligned and then drag up into space to alt drag, to create a duplicate, because this final platform, I want it to sit at something that's not reachable by a normal jump, and we'll get into why later on. So let's push this back to 0 and scale this appropriately. Right about there seems fine. Let's put this off slightly to the left there. Okay, so let's delete our... Actually, let's make sure this is not intersection. There we go. Okay, let's delete the extra BSP. And now it's time to line everything up. So you'll notice that when I zeroed out the transform, it was way back there. So let's go and make sure that everything is on 0 in the X. So select all of your geometry that we'll be using. You can just control click all this. And there you go. And then you'll see it says multiple values, but if you hit 0 and push everything back, everything is good to go. And if I click off of this and hit play, you'll see that that is true. Great. So we still have everything working, everything's good to go. Let's hit escape and let's take a look at what else we need to do. You'll notice that we have this yellow box, which is a light mass importance volume. So essentially anything within this volume, and let's go ahead and line this up and scale it so it's going to fit our game. Anything within this volume that is lit will have the appropriate quality that you desire. Anything outside is going to be treated as a lower priority and with lower quality shadows and fall off and that kind of thing. And then we can also take a look at, well, that's actually pretty huge. Let's scale that back down and then push it up. There we go. Okay. And let's take a look at this purple box, which is a post-process volume. This is where all your motion blur and your masked vignette and film grade and all that kind of cool post-process effects go. So just make sure that this envelops your camera, wherever that is, and scale up and push it up into space. Okay, great. And that looks good. I'm going to keep the back wall for now, and that seems fine. We need to do one more thing before we quit this video. It's to go into our extras here and right click and create a blueprint class, and we need to make a game mode and call it GM underscore UE Kong for game mode underscore UE Kong. Okay, that's good. Let's right click and save. Let's head up to edit, project settings. Let's head to maps and modes, and we need to get it off of the side scroller example, and we need to change our default game mode to GM UE4 Kong. There we go. Okay, all the other things will be fine. We're just going to use them for now. Editor startup map. Oh, that's right. We haven't saved the new map yet, have we? So let's go ahead and save that. Let's go File, Save As, and let's save this as UE Kong 1 for our first level. And in UE Kong, right click, new folder, maps. That's what we were missing. Great. So click that, save. Everything is taken care of. Now, there's one problem that you may have noticed when we started playing around, and that is that when we jump, we can't make it to the next area. Let's discuss why in the next video. Great, now we have our environment blocked out, we have our game mode set up, and our project management. In the next video, we'll take a look at jumping around and modifying the player constraints. See you there.